Your support helps us bring you programs you love. Go to WyomingPBS.org, click on Support, and become a sustaining member or an annual member. It's easy and secure. Thank you.
Wyoming's water supply is shaped by rainfall, snowfall, runoff, and infiltration, and in many areas, concerns are growing about the adequacy of the available ground and surface water supply. Who makes the forecasts and predictions about water in Wyoming, and what might the future hold? Wyoming Water with hydrologist Jim Fahey, next on Wyoming Chronicle.
Funding for this program is made possible in part by the Wyoming Humanities Council, helping Wyoming take a closer look at life through the humanities, thinkwy.org, and by the members of the Wyoming PBS Foundation. Thank you for your support.
And as we begin our discussion on Wyoming Chronicle, all things water in Wyoming, it's my pleasure to be joined by Jim Fahey. Jim is a hydrologist with the National Resources Conservation Service. Jim, welcome to Wyoming Chronicle.
Thank you, Craig.
Jim, it's good to see you again. We've known each other for quite a while. And you produced, Jim, the Wyoming Basin and Water Supply Outlook Report, something that's been produced since, we learned, 1954.
Yeah, 1954. I went back down in the basement and found the earliest one was February 1954, yeah.
So, Jim, tell me, who are the consumers of the report that you produce? Why is that report produced? We're going to talk about a lot of things that are in that report, the trends of that report, how it's produced, but who are the consumers of that?
Well, the main consumers are any water managers across the state, state engineers, any irrigation, ditch, canal managers, private reservoirs. For instance, Beaver Naughton out in western part of the state, owned by Pacific Corps, uses our forecast religiously. The Bureau of Reclamation will also use our forecast. However, the Bureau of Reclamation also runs their own model for water supply, so we do collaborate with them as well.
So tell us how you forecast. What tools do you use? What is at your disposal to make the forecast? And then we'll get into what is the forecast telling us.
Okay, well, basically, the way I forecast is I need to look at the current conditions. And I'm looking at the snow water equivalent, I'm looking at the precip trends, I'm looking at temperature trends, antecedent conditions like soil moisture, to get a feel of what the physical conditions are over the basins before we even look at the model.
How are you looking at those things? How's that done?
It's done well. It's mainly looking at the National Water Climate Center has a great website where it displays all the stations, snow water equivalent, as well as precip data and temperature data, and then other stuff on the web from different agencies like the Weather Service, the Climate Prediction Center. Also, I look at that for trends and also what's going to happen in the near future as far as temperatures and precipitation. And then I collaborate with the National Water Climate Center. Those are the ones that run the model out of Portland, Oregon. And basically it's a statistical model where they're mainly looking at amount of snowpack versus statistically the amount of snowpack over the past 30 to 40 years. And they run the model and come up with a flow for, I think we have 20, quote me on this, 25, 30 forecast points across the state. And they forecast the amount of flow at those forecast points for like the spring and summer season. And then when I look at those numbers, we collaborate further. If the numbers I don't like the numbers, or they're too high, too low, whatever, and then we finally come up with a forecast, and then I put that in the report that the users see every month.
We're showing our viewers the link to your website. How often do you publish the report?
Once a month from January through June.
Historically, Jim, how accurate has it been? What have you learned?
I think, as far as like a grade, I think we're doing a fair job with the forecasting. Again, there's a lot of limitations to the modeling that we can improve. but especially Wyoming, the parameters, especially spring, the model has problems because of the statistical model. It doesn't account for the spring precip that we may or may not get, and it doesn't account for rapid warm-ups that we may get sometimes in the spring and early summer. That's a severe limitation to the modeling. So,
tell me, way back in 1954 to today, I've got to believe, though, things have really changed. Things are really different now, and things have improved, though.
Yeah, in 1954, they were mainly reliant on manual snow course stations, and they did not have precipitation in the forecast. It was just the water in the snowpack was somebody manually inputted or measured, and then they relayed that to the forecasters. Whereas now you have more of they really didn't have a model, and now we use 30-year norms. Probably, I don't know if you've heard that term. We just changed over to 1990 to 2020, where we can look at the history of the snow water equivalents and the precipitation averages, where they didn't have that capability back in 1954, and they weren't really using per se a model. Because they didn't have a lot of data to ingest into the model. So it has changed.
Let's talk about trends. Tell me about Wyoming's water trends, and how are they now compared to, say, other regional states around us? How are things looking in your eyes?
Craig, as we're a headwater state in Wyoming, a lot of it mirrors for instance, the Colorado. I'm concerned about the Green River Basin because of lack of runoff the last 15, 20 years, or low runoff, and that kind of mirrors the overall Colorado Basin low water regime. Also, the Upper North Platte is kind of concerning in the last 5 to 10 years with lower than average runoffs. The other parts of the state, they are lower than historically, but not too concerning, especially the Snake. Not too concerned with the Snake. However, this year they did have one of the lowest runoff numbers historically this past spring and summer.
So statistically, you can measure this. Subjectively, do you put a reason to this? I mean, I guess I'm asking about climate change. Is this something that you decide is a cause of this, or are there other things that are involved with this? What are the causes of these changes?
Well, first of all, we talk climate change. The way it's affecting the snowpack is it's not just anecdotally. You can see it in the science. Also, the sites that we have out there show temperature data too, and you can see the warming of the temperature data, especially the last 15, 20 years. So the snowpack has risen, the main snowpack has risen up to 800 to 1,000 feet. So that's with that, you get less amount that can melt that used to melt before, so you get less runoff. Kind of a simplistic view, but it makes sense.
So I want to read you something that you said in 2014. In my eyes, it isn't so long ago, and I wonder about trends. Jim, you said this in the news report. You said, hydrologist Jim Fahey says statewide precipitation levels last month were above 130% of average. Precipitation levels last month ranged from 203% of average near the upper Yellowstone watershed to 80% near the Cheyenne and Niobrara basins. And that wasn't so long ago. And now trends are alarming. I guess what I'm wondering is that in the news, we've all heard in the last year or so, the trends are alarming. Yet, things seem to be trendy. And what should we take from the somewhat recent past?
Well, you quoted precipitation, Greg, and precipitation is a very variable parameter in forecasting runoff. And it's all about timing, especially in Wyoming. I don't know, let me not get off topic too much, but as far as precipitation, it's the timing, and I tell this to all the reporters and anybody I talk to, it's all about the spring precipitation in Wyoming. That, if we don't get it, we're in trouble, or if we're time for drought, time for fires, or what have you. As far as the trends, and we've had a big long drought the 2000s. That was unprecedented, even for Wyoming. We went from 2000 to 2009, and then we picked up some. We had a big water year in 2000, somewhat 2010. 2011 was a very great water year. 2014 wasn't bad. 2016 and 17 for most of the state was good. But in between, we've had some bad years. I mean, but overall, in that last 20 years, because we've had that 10-year or 9-year cycle that we didn't, we even for Wyoming was dry. The length of that drought was unprecedented.
When you look back at that history, were those droughts predicted? In other words, did we anticipate those to the extent that we can anticipate drought today, or is it just something that we have to experience? And in your confidence factor for the next 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, where are you with Wyoming and drought, I guess is the question.
Well, that's a good question, Craig. I mean, confidence in springtime runoff forecasting can be low at times. But as far as trends, I mean, you look at, for instance, you probably heard in the news the La Nina cycle.
Sure.
This might be explained a little bit, we had a La Nina last year, 2020, 2021. Just looked at the wire on the CPC on the internet, and they predicted an 87% chance of a La Nina through February, December through March, or whatever it is of this coming winter. And then when you look back at the La Nina years and the El Nino years, La Nina years for Wyoming usually means the northern part of the state will get wetter and be colder, and this is La Nina. And the southern part of the state will be drier and warmer. But there's also been there's a lot of chaos, a lot of variability, whereas some years La Nina, like 16 and 17 was a strong La Nina, and we had a really good water year. And also it's unprecedented to have 2 La Nina years in a row to produce the same effects as far as we're talking drought. So it's very variable. I don't know if that answers your question or not. I might be going around and around a bit with it, but
variable is a good word. I mean, the bottom line is, even today, with all of the technology and all the modeling, it's just really hard to predict.
It's hard to predict. We're getting better, but I think, like I said at the beginning of the interview, the inclusion of data up high, the remote sensing, more ground truth, snow tells, which isn't easy to do above the alpine level, above 11, 12, 13,000, may help the situation. And then how is the climate change, again, how is that wild card affecting our modeling and our prediction capability? That's yet to be seen.
Take us behind the scenes and give us a little more insight in how is snowpack measured today? Is it more automated than it used to be? Is it still a manual process? Same thing with reservoir capacity, same thing with stream flows and soil moisture. Is that more of an automated SCADA-like process today, or is it still really a manual type?
No, Craig, it's more automated. We do still do have, about 30 manual snow courses across the state, and those are done by some of them done by our NRCS employees, some are done by the state engineer employees, and those are done, 3 or 4 times a year during the winter and early spring, and then those are incorporated a little bit into the modeling, but again, not as much as they used to be because of their low elevation. They're still looked at, but they're not a primary input into the model. Primary input of the model is the SNOTEL automated network. And now that we're into 2022, and some of these sites have been in since 78, 79, we've got a pretty good base of data there. As far as you mentioned reservoir data, again, most of the data is automated through the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. We do get some of the private reservoirs. We do get a monthly, like Viva Naughton at Pacific Core and near Kemmerer. They provide us their storage and their percent of capacity in a kind of a spreadsheet once a month. The Bureau kind of just goes, since it's automated, it just automates into the system. So really don't talk to them, in person much. Soil moisture, that's a good one. We wish we had more, more soil moisture sensors, but we have those attached to some of our snow tells, and we put them out like 2, 8, 12, 20 inches in depth, and they measure the percent of water capacity. So those are very valuable too, but again, spatially, they're very few and very, across the state. Stream flow of course, is a big one because we have to know if our forecasting is verifying. We rely mostly on the USGS, of course, for stream flow data, as well as the state engineers, and some of the Bureau of Reclamation has stream flow data that we use. And that's practically all automated.
Jim, Wyoming has a cloud seeding program. A, do you find it beneficial? B, do you consider that in any of your forecasting relative to its potential in increasing Wyoming's water supplies?
It doesn't. It's not. It's only a factor if we see the increase in the snow tells or the snow courses on those basins that are doing weather modification. Mm-hmm. So that's really the extent of that, Greg.
I guess I'll follow up a little bit. Have you learned whether those technologies are helpful?
Well, I'd say, talking to different folks, some say they don't see any
Snowtail doesn't give you any relevant, conclusive data about that?
Yeah, that's it. I know the areas that they do the weather modification. I can't say that I've really researched whether it's increased or decreased the amount of snowpack or snow water equivalent. So I have to,
Be an interesting
It would be
question.
interesting to see, yeah.
There's lots of technology out there, Jim. Does your office have all the technology that it needs? Is there some technology, newer technology, new study tools, what have you, that are out there? Are there some things that you wish you had, maybe that are on your Christmas wish list that would help you do your job a little more efficiently?
I think if we had maybe more than one model to look at, that would be nice. Like the weather folks have. Sometimes they have 3 models. They look at European model and a GFS model and a Canadian model, what have you. I think it would be nice. The statistical model we use now is getting to be a little bit inadequate, in my opinion. Again, we need to have more of a physical-based model that incorporates soil moisture, or we call antecedent conditions in hydrology, temperature trends, and precipitation trends. As we are getting better at climate predictions, it would be nice to have that incorporated in the model, just to see what kind of flow we get with that kind of a modeling versus just the statistical model, which we're just relying on what's on the ground, snowpack, what's the water equivalent in the snowpack, and then when it melts, because we know it's this level, we think it's going to be this flow because history has told us that. So that'd be another couple of models to look at.
All of us this summer, Jim, we saw pictures of Lake Mead, and we talked about this a little bit off camera. But
sure.
What were you thinking, Jim, when you saw those pictures? I know what I was thinking, but as a hydrologist, what's going through your mind when you look at Lake Mead? You visited Lake Mead years and years ago, and so did I. And now it's a different place. And we are a headwater state. What runs through your mind? Well,
it mirrors what's happening in especially the Green River Basin. We talked the last 20 years. Lake Mead's 20 years in the making as far as the low flows we're seeing now. The last 20 years, the Colorado mirrors what the Green River, because the Green River is a major tributary to the Colorado system. We've only seen 2 or 3, maybe 4 decent spring runoffs in that period. It just tells me that there's something that's causing us to, is it climate change? It could be the efficiency of the snowmelt. The amount of snowpack is decreased. That's what I see as a hydrologist. And now we're seeing the results. I don't know anything about, of course the water's been used, but I don't worry about how they use it. We're, as hydrologists, water supply forecasters, we're pinpointing how much water is going to come into the system inflow-wise. And that really we haven't seen that.
Let's go back to Wyoming, if I could, as we kind of wrap things up here. What are farmers and ranchers asking you today? What's on their mind? And let's go maybe around the state. What areas are people more concerned, less concerned, I guess? And you've talked about the Green River Basin as maybe being folks having the most concern. Are there areas where people are really concerned about their water future, Jim?
Well, recently it's been the Bear River Basin, which is just a small sliver on the southwest corner of the state, Uintah County, and also the Bighorn Basin is really seeing a really bad part of the drought this last year and a half. I've seen, because I'm on the Wyoming drought team, and so I see the emails and the concerns from the ranchers and the farmers. In other areas, northeast Wyoming, they've really had it bad the last couple of years. The green is low flows, but there is not, because of the topography and the climate in the green, we really don't see too much as far as irrigation problems, because there's not a lot of irrigable, is that a word, land to deal with. But most of it's in the Bighorn, northeast, the northeast part of the state, and then the extreme southwest part of the state.
Are there any policy changes in your eyes that can be made that can help Wyoming's water situation?
Well, that's a loaded question. How do you mean?
Anything that you've thought about? Any policy topics on your mind that could be helpful to farmers or ranchers or to others that are consumers of Wyoming's water that might be of benefit to them down the road?
I think what I've learned from the NRCS conservationists and the conservation guys and the area the range managers is that they're trying to emphasize the using more efficient irrigation. Going from, instead of flooding the fields, going into pivots and stuff like that. I don't know about mandating or policy changes. That's kind of out of my realm. But use the water a little bit more efficiently. We use most of our, as you know, in Wyoming, most of our surface water is for agriculture, and most of our drinking water is groundwater.
Jim, what are students today bringing to the table, and maybe how does their background maybe differ from yours? What are they studying to better understand hydrology?
Well, I think they're using more, like, for instance, GIS technology. That's really increased in the last few years, and I've seen that from some of the younger generation coming up. Basic hydrology is basic hydrology. It's the same. You're going to learn the same techniques, but with that, especially that GIS technology, it's again with remote sensing, that technology to look at the whole picture and of the basins, especially with snowpack. I'm looking forward to seeing that happen in the near future.
What universities, I guess, study this more than others? Where is the hotbed of research relative to hydrology? Who stands out in your mind?
Colorado University.
Mm-hmm. What do they do?
Well, they're doing a lot of modeling, different modeling. Like I talked
about that earlier.
Yeah, mm-hmm. They're doing different. In fact, I think that the Climate Center, don't quote me on this, the Water Climate Center is tasking the Colorado University to help them out with their new modeling that's coming out in the next couple of years.
You told me earlier, everybody asks you, so I'll ask you. What's going to happen this year? This spring, Wyoming will?
This spring, I think the northern part of the state's going to have a normal to above normal runoff year, and then central, normal. Southern part of the state, still with the La Nina conditions, still having a problem with runoff.
Southwest or southeast?
The whole south, upper Platte, Green, lower Green, Bear, will have a lower than average runoff. I mean, general terms, because it's still early in the game, but that's what we see right now. And as far as and I'm looking at the Climate Prediction Center for the winter, it does kind of look like a La Nina with their forecasts, with the northern part of the state having better chance for colder than average temps and wetter than average precipitation.
For those of us who experienced 3 feet of snow last spring in our driveway, it's hard to imagine that anybody in Wyoming is short of water. But
that's right.
Wyoming's a big state.
Well, we had 14 inches, and I think we had that 17 inches maybe somewhere in Casper, but I had about 12 to 14 in my backyard about 2 days ago. So,
But it's early.
it's early. It's really early.
And so what I mean, people in Wyoming really need to look at really what happens after what, March 1st, April 1st?
It's all about the spring, Craig, all about the spring.
Yeah. Well, Jim Fahey, thank you so much. You've been a hydrologist in Wyoming for quite a while.
Oh, yeah, almost 20 years. Yeah.
Appreciate your time and expertise, and thank you so much for joining us on Wyoming Chronicle.
Happy to be here. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Funding for this program is made possible in part by the Wyoming Humanities Council, helping Wyoming take a closer look at life through the humanities, thinkwhy.org, and by the members of the Wyoming PBS Foundation. Thank you for your support.